All right, friends, welcome to the What's Right show. Sam Mirejovsky here behind the What's Right microphone. Greetings, friends. So happy to be with you this beautiful Tuesday. I was yesterday, I can't believe I didn't think of it at the time. I was reflecting this morning in preparation for this program, was reflecting on who all of these Democrats in California remind me of. Was thinking, here they are standing in front of cameras, literally with chaos and mayhem transpiring behind them, and they're basically saying nothing to see here. We don't have any problem. And we have idiots like Gavin Newsom standing there going, hey, Trump created this. This is Trump's fault. Everything was okay until Trump and his goons from the National Guard showed up. And then it hit me. I don't think anybody else has made this comparison. So enjoy it for what it's worth. Robbie, do you remember Bagdad Bob? Now, this guy, Mohammed Saeed al-Sahaf, that was his full name. I didn't know that. I had to look it up because we all knew him affectionately as Bagdad Bob. He was the Minister of Information in Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist regime at the time of George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq. This was the guy that went on television every night to tell us that everything was fine. He literally had Don Rumsfeld's shock and awe campaign, like bombs going off behind him, and he's like, everything's fine, everything's good, nothing to see here, everything is peachy. And it became comical. The mainstream media in the United States, some members of which are still in the business today and are roundly critical of Trump's intervention in the LA riots, criticized and made fun of Bagdad Bob for being a reality denialist. And yet these people now engage in the same levels of absurd reality denialism as he once did. So, this is where we are at. We have had a complete and total break from, between a schism, if you will, between people who see things as they are and then people who see what they want to see. And look, Gavin Newsom is a liar. He's a propagandist. He is someone who he's a complete narcissistic, cretin. He's able to lie and lie and lie for lying's sake to keep up the narrative that he wants to push, which is, of course, he wants to let these riots play out. He wants the violence to continue. He wants police to be afraid. He wants to have the Trump administration retreat from their zero tolerance enforcement of immigration law. The Democrat experiment in California fails if immigration laws are enforced. That's the simple truth. And so, this organized mayhem that I believe is being created, we'll get into this here a little bit as the show transpires, that I believe was funded, aided and abetted by political leaders in California, that these protests with suddenly 1,000, 2,000 people showing up in a certain spot, equipped, ready to go, putting on masks that are resistive to tear gas and other nerve agents, pallets of cinder block bricks ready to be broken down and hurled at unsuspecting police officers driving below freeway overpasses, communications, printed banners, flags, etc., being passed out. None of this is spontaneous protest. This has all been organized. And my point is, increasingly obviously organized by the very same people that are then standing in front of microphones, TV cameras, etc., and saying, hey, oh, come on, Trump, don't enforce it. We got this handled. Yes, you have it handled. You have it handled the same way Tim Walz had Minneapolis handled in the wake of the George Floyd riots. And because it didn't get sorted out right away, those riots spread. They metastasized across the country. It hit even our community here in beautiful Las Vegas. Now, at the time, Sheriff Joe Lombardo, no nonsense sheriff, quickly enforced, well, it didn't let the protests spread here very much. And the protesters, I think, looted 1 or 2 stores over on Las Vegas Boulevard near downtown. And then that was that. But the scenes last night out of LA, folks, if this spreads across the country, we are talking about damages in the hundreds of billions of dollars. These are, I watched as a mob of I think 300-400 people going into and looting an Apple store in downtown Los Angeles. Restaurants raided, stores broken into, sneaker stores broken into, and folks running out with expensive shoes because, of course, nothing says support immigrants like stealing from businesses, many of which, by the way, if you know LA, are minority and immigrant owned. But of course, these are legal immigrants. These are immigrants that are paying their taxes. These are immigrants who are doing things the right way. So they are part of the problem, not of the solution for the Democrats who wish to retain power. Now, Michael Schellenberger did a great breakdown of it. I'm going to just tell you here. Schellenberger, of course, is a former lib, a former Democrat who has come around in the wake of COVID and become a surprising thought leader on the side of reason and honestly of criticism of Democrats. And he talks about this very simply, right? That the most inflammatory thing here in the wake of, Karen Bass and the governor, Gavin Newsom, saying that Trump is just inflaming tensions. The most inflammatory thing that the Democrats are doing in California is that they themselves did not send in the National Guard immediately, that they themselves gave stand-down orders to police, that they themselves, Bass, Newsom, and others, allowed the situation to spin out of control because the chaos was always the objective. They allowed mobs to pelt law enforcement with bricks and fireworks. They wanted the officers who intervened to be accused of oppression. They wanted public spaces to descend into chaos while calling the enforcement of laws the problem. It's just like I said yesterday. We're in an upside down world if you believe that lighting cars on fire and torching property and spray painting buildings and looting stores is okay, is an expression of freedom. But coming in with the National Guard, coming in with police presence in an effort to stop this unlawful activity, that is fascism. That's the logic of the left. How is it that California can feel so anarchic, right? Anarchy running amok, lawlessness. And yet, on the other hand, be so authoritarian. And this contradiction, and Schellenberger does a great job of it in a piece that he published earlier today. He says, look, it's not an actual contradiction. I mean, it is, but it's deliberate. California doesn't swing between chaos and control. It imposes both on purpose and at scale. When President Xi visits San Francisco, look at how quickly they cleaned things up. All of a sudden, the homeless disappeared, crime eradicated, everything clean. And as soon as she left, back to the mayhem. You have store owners, business owners who are burdened with the biggest regulations, the biggest taxes, the most onerous of restrictions of how they use their property. But yet, you can camp out on the street in front of said business, shoot up drugs, literally defecate in the street, and that is fine. Why is it? The purpose behind this is a dissolution of society. If society is dissolved, this attacks the core of capitalism, because in the minds of radical leftists, the real exploiter is the guy who's trying to run his business. And they will do everything they can between taxing him to death, regulating the hell out of him, and then making his life or her life miserable by virtue of letting criminals, hoodlums, homeless people, and drug addicts run rampant. These terrible scenes in LA that are playing out right now are an extension of this. It's just par for the course. More of the same. I got to take a break. Just important to know what this is. Sam Mirejovsky, News Talk 840, KXNT. Greetings, friends. Great to again have you with us here this beautiful Tuesday. Be back right after this break.
I'm the best.
Personal injury law has been the same for a long time.
The best.
Big egos, greed, and sleazy schemes. We've had enough. Welcome to Sam and Ash, the new standard for personal injury law, where things are done the right way, because you deserve a team that delivers real support and results. When you have both, your whole world can change. Sam and Ash Injury Law, because you deserve what's right.
Hi, Sam Mirejovsky here, Nevada's favorite recovering Californian behind the What's Right microphone. Sam at whatsrightshow.com. Sam at whatsrightshow.com is my email. And on X, formerly known as Twitter, at What's Right Sam. You know, I had a thought about this situation here about the riots. I'm calling it an extension of business as usual for the Democratic Party. Think about living in a blue state like California. I can speak to this as Nevada's favorite recovering Californian, that you have this seeming paradox I was mentioning just before the break of, on one hand, being very tightly regulated as a business owner, as a productive citizen, as owner of any kind of a commercial enterprise, property, etc. Rules upon rules upon rules, taxes and fees, up the yin yang. And then in these same jurisdictions, they'll go ahead and decriminalize theft. So we call a paradox. Super tight rules, super stringent rules on one hand for one group of people, and I'll let you think about that for a minute, who those people are. And then on the other hand, you have decriminalization of one of the most fundamental wrongs in society, to steal from another person things that do not belong to you. Do you remember when the president of South Africa visited Trump and everybody in the liberal media and political establishment got the vapors over the fact that Trump called out this hoodlum president that South Africa has over South Africa's expropriating and murdering, targeting of white farmers? And what was the refrain? Well, what do they keep telling us? It's not real, Sam. It's not real. Trump's just talking out of his butthole. Okay. All right, so we heard that over and over again. Pardon the vulgarity. So, and what's actually going on in South Africa? It ties into what's going on right now in LA. See, the South African regime, these gangster, black politicians, are allowing criminal elements within their country to run amok. It's not an actual government program to take farms away from black people, although there are some laws that are in place that are clearly targeting that. But really, what's going on is the government just says, "Oh, we're not going to prosecute you. You go and murder a white farmer or rape his family members, steal from them. Oh, no harm's going to come to you for that." At the same time, by the way, if you're a white farmer in South Africa and you need a building permit to build something on your property, good luck with that. Not so easy over there. Government's going to bend you over a barrel, charge you a bunch of fees, make things difficult for you. Okay, so here we are. What the Democrats want, and this is what has to be told over and over again to understand what the Democratic Party has devolved into. It's been taken over completely by radicals, and it's not now. It's been happening over the last 15 to 20 years. The Democratic Party has become really an organization, political movement that has waged war on the productive, on the successful, on the strong. Now, they're not there to actually help the poor. They're not there to help, minority Americans. They're not there to advance the interests of the downtrodden. The downtrodden, quote unquote, for the Democratic Party are just a bunch of useful, very important word, useful idiots. They use the poor, they use minorities, they use people that they constantly draw attention to how their position in life is weaker and less advantaged. They use them as pretext for going out there and punishing the useful. The useful are the enemies of democratic socialists. If you're a business owner, you kind of got some things. You may not be the biggest genius on the planet, but you understand basic economics. You've had to balance a checkbook. You know how things work. Are you more or less likely to support a radical Democrat? Question mark. The answer is no. So what do we need to do to these people? Because this is how the left views them. They are obstacles to complete and full power. These people have to be destroyed. And you do it in simple ways. Now, this riot is a blessing. Stop enforcement of immigration on one hand, and on the other hand, drive further destruction and pain upon those people still remaining in California who are resistant to the governing regime. Once again, I have a business, let's say, in San Francisco. San Francisco decriminalizes, together with the state of California, really any enforcement of theft functionally below $2,000. My little shop that I pay exorbitant rent for, that I have to pay taxes. There's a high minimum wage for my employees that I have. My little shop, anybody can basically walk in and take something. That is the government saying to me, we want you gone. And when you go to San Francisco today, and if you haven't been in 20 years, you will be shocked. Hell, if you haven't been in 10 years, you will be shocked. Every third, if not every other store in the once bustling financial district, in the area, even around Union Square, the waterfront, restaurants that have been in business for 100 years, gone. It's over. Why? Because the politicians have driven them out, using their feral pets as frontline soldiers. Once you start to recognize these patterns and see these things for what it is, you begin to notice what these riots are all about. I'm just saying. So think about this when I play what Karen Bass said at a press conference yesterday. Oh my holy hell. Sam Mirejovsky, News Talk 840, KXNT. Well, how is this for a fun development in California? Apparently, Compton's Chicano street gang leaders put out a clip on social media declaring that their area of Compton is a quote-unquote riot-free zone. And they said, without exception, violators will be executed on the spot. This is the irony. When gang members can keep people more safe than elected Democrats. Sam Mirejovsky, News Talk 840, KXNT. Greetings, friends. Welcome to the program. As always, this hour of the show brought to you by Sam & Ash Injury Law, 702-820-1234, because you deserve what's right. Now, LA deserves, the people of LA deserve better than what they keep electing. And Karen Bass being a great example of this. Ms. Bass, herself a long-time, lifelong, I might add, trained agitator. This is who she is. Bass has a whole, Bass, her entire history, right? This is when did she get her start? Connected to groups, advocacy groups for Cuba, the Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, all the way through to the National Endowment for Democracy, which sounds great. I think that group was originally started by Reagan, but has since devolved into a globalist hellhole, a group of Obama-type people running around the world, destroying, nationalism and sovereignty. So, again, this Bass served as the vice chair of the National Endowment for Democracy of NED, one of the worst NGOs in the country. She started serving on the board in 2014, became vice chair in 2021. She held this position while she was in Congress. Soft power regime change. That's what they do. All right. The 2003 Rose Revolution in Georgia, NED. 2004 Orange Revolution in Ukraine, NED. 2005 Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan, also NED. Probably involved in the 2011 Arab Spring and 2018 Velvet Revolution in Armenia. But what I really suspect is that the 2020 BLM riots were themselves a color revolution put together by NED and others to rid us of Donald Trump. That's what they were thinking. I'm telling you. Our government tested these tactics in Georgia, Ukraine, and elsewhere, and then, brought it home. And Bass was right in the middle of it. Back in 2020, when Bass was under consideration as a potential, woman of color, because Biden then said he was going to have a woman of color as his vice president. They ended up going to the cackling hyena. But regardless, Karen Bass is being considered in the Washington Post. Yes, that Washington Post ran a long story saying that Bass's history with Cuba should disqualify her from VP consideration. At 19, Bass began visiting Cuba every 6 months for 5 years. It's crazy. Was that 10 visits? It's part of a group called the Venceremos Brigade. Began as a joint project between the Cuban Communist government and the Students for a Democratic Society, the other group, SDS, that Bass has been a part of for a very long time. By the way, I'll tell you how dialed in Bass is. A lot of you don't realize this. Bass was herself implicated in the very same scholarship scandal that took down a powerful LA County supervisor, Mark Ridley Thomas. Now, Ridley Thomas was himself federally indicted for receiving a scholarship from the USC's School of Social Work. I think also maybe his daughter got some sort of special attention from USC. At any rate, Bass, now mayor of Los Angeles, back then received the exact same scholarship. But guess what? Ridley Thomas got burned to the ground, convicted, etc., etc. Bass wasn't even charged. Just some thoughts. Must be that being connected to NED, to Ned, and having powerful friends in the Obama administration can help you out quite a bit. So Bass, now this is her history. That's her resume. Know a little bit about her. Yesterday holds a press conference last night, saying that these protests were all peaceful on Thursday until Trump sent in the cavalry. Again, thinking about Bagdad Bob when I listen to these people.
We need to stop the raids. This should not be happening in our city. It is not warranted, and the only thing it does is contribute to chaos. This was chaos that was started at Washington, D.C. On Thursday, the city was peaceful. On Friday, it was not, because of the intervention of the federal government.
Okay, so the government came in. The cavalry she's talking about here are the ICE agents who are going around arresting criminal illegal aliens. In fact, one of the operations, I mentioned this yesterday, and I've gotten some emails from you that you didn't know this, so it's great that I'm bringing. Let me bring it up again. That one of the big operations downtown was for a financial crimes case that involved tariffs, basically duty fees on materials shipped into the country, where this business, or a series of businesses, had lied about the value of the goods, saying that they were worth far less, so they would pay less fees. And the fraud was to the tune of $17 million in lost tax revenue to the federal government. Like, I don't know, sounds like a case of theft, a fraud on all of us as citizens. So it wasn't even an immigration enforcement action. Nonetheless, there are clearly immigrants who are being targeted. They're being picked up. They're violating federal law. They're in the country illegally. They're subject to removal. You listen to her carefully. The mayor is blaming the enforcement of laws on the chaos. It's blaming the chaos on the enforcement of laws. Okay, now, isn't that funny? That's like blaming. Can you imagine a Democrat actually coming out and saying, well, you know what, maybe, miss, if your dress wasn't so short or your top so low, maybe you wouldn't have gotten sexually assaulted. Like what? That is the type of argument that's being made here. Oh, you're enforcing. How dare you? You're enforcing. You are inflaming tensions. But at the same time, this woman, who is now the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, is doing what? She is, with her whole history of these color revolutions and going and taking down, toppling governments, is taking her experience that she's accumulated over 72 years on this planet and is using it in her city. And Gavin Newsom is in on it. Everybody's in on it. All the Democrats are in on it because this is the source of their political power. And they recognize that Trump coming in with ICE agents is the beginning of the end of their little scheme. The federal government will come in and enforce the laws. The federal government will protect businesses if it needs to. The federal government will do what the state of California refuses. Shared just at the beginning of the segment a little funny story about the Compton gang. It says, no riots in Compton. You come into our gang territory, we will F you up, right? F-A-F-O. right? That's kind of the thing. And by the way, so this is by the way, this is the entire source of power for the mafia. Let's go back. I mean, I've mentioned this too before. You know, the globalists in Europe are running amok. They're importing all sorts of third world, disgusting, horrible people from bad parts of the world. Okay, they come into places like Italy. And the Italian government before Meloni just let these people get away with things. If they, you know, some guy came in, a Syrian immigrant came in, or North African immigrant came into a little town in Italy, and maybe he raped a girl, maybe raped a 17, 16, 14-year-old girl. And they would literally go easy on that person because you have to be compassionate with these migrants. The mafia that was all but extinct in Italy made a huge comeback. Why? Well, because people wanted law and order. The mafia could provide what the government can't. And it threatens the entire stability of the state when the state no longer comes in and protects its citizens. And when armed gangs of hoodlums or mafia or whoever are doing a better job of protecting citizens than the government itself, why does the government even need to exist? And a neo-Marxist like Mayor Bass, this is the penultimate moment, right? Then you have a complete, dissolution of society. Everything goes, falls apart. Everything goes to hell. By the way, these people are all about National Guard when it suits their agenda. There's a great clip that just resurfaced from June of 2024, a year ago, posted by Governor Newsom at the Tijuana border wall. This is not the border. Well, there's a little bit of a wall there, one part of it. But this is the border between Mexico and the U.S. right outside of San Diego.
So back down here at the border, Tijuana, right behind me, San Diego sector. This is the San Ysidro port of entry, not too far away, which is the largest in the Western Hemisphere. We were just down here with the National Guard, meeting with customs agents as well as Border Patrol, talking about our partnerships. 390 National Guardsmen and women that have been working, particularly as it relates to fentanyl here in the state of California. Look at the bottom line. At the end of the day, they need more resources. Everybody needs more resources. And the Republican Party has been consistently standing in the way of providing the resources, the support for the men and women working hard, not only here at the border, but out throughout the state of California and this country to address the issues related to the border. It's time for them to stop playing politics. It's time for the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, to stop playing politics and do the right thing.
Yeah, Gavin Newsom wanted more funding for the border, more funding for the National Guard, more of everything. In the middle of the presidential campaign, this is still when Joe Biden was in the race, okay? And Gavin Newsom was at all times a prominent advocate for the Democratic Party and the Democratic nominee, the president running for re-election, and later the vice president seeking her own term in office. So, right. And this whole thing was, the border bill, the Democrat-supported border bill that a number of loser Republicans signed onto. You can never forget that. That really was a bunch of pork for Ukraine that undoubtedly would have given more money to NED, to NED, and other NGOs, and continue to fund the monster behemoth that is the Democratic Party. So this is all fascinating stuff. Now I got to take a quick break. Sam Mirejovsky here behind the What's Right microphone. Friends, I'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. Sam Mirejovsky here, your host of the What's Right show. This hour brought to you by Sam & Ash Injury Law, because you deserve what's right. Joining us at the top of the hour, we're going to have Mike Brest, who is a defense reporter for the Washington Examiner. He broke a detailed report on the Pentagon's deployment of the Marines and National Guard troops to L.A. He's got his finger on the pulse here and can explain fully the administration's use of Title X. This is the procedure by which Trump overrode Governor Newsom's refusal to provide troops to Los Angeles. And we can talk a little bit about some of the tactics here, as well as the political fallout. So Mike will join us at 2, just after the break. You do not want to miss this. By the way, in preparation for this, let's mention the exchange on the Hill between Congressman McCollum and Pete Hegseth. This is what the Democrats are trying to do. So Betty McCollum, Democrat, Minnesota, that same Minnesota that burned to the ground. Well, Minneapolis did during the summer of George. Basically goes, hey, Governor Walz, Tim Walz called the National Guard. He did it. And what are you doing interfering here?
Mr. Secretary, we're both from Minnesota. I was in the Twin Cities during the riots that followed the murder of George Floyd. Tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets for days. Governor Walz made the decision to call up the Minnesota National Guard. At no point did we need the citizens of Minnesota request that the Marines be deployed. Our state and local law enforcement, along with our National Guard, who have worked on crowd control, they were more than enough. They were more than capable of handling this situation. History has proven that law enforcement and the National Guard are more than capable of handling situations more volatile than what happened this weekend. We all see the continuous loops on TV, but this looks nothing like the George Floyd protests or the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles in 1992. Mr. Secretary, this is a deeply unfair position to put our Marines in. Their service should be honored. It should not be exploited.
Every Democrat that argues that this is not a big deal and it's nothing like the 1992 riots or the summer of George Floyd ought to have their head examined and never be taken seriously. Here's Pete Hegseth's reply.
Well, Congresswoman, thank you for the question. You are right. We are both originally from Minnesota, which is why I recall 2020 quite well, when Governor Walz abandoned a police precinct and allowed it to be burned to the ground. And also allowed 5 days of chaos to occur inside the streets of Minneapolis. The police precinct, ma'am, was abandoned and burned to the ground. And because of that, the National Guard was eventually far too late mobilized. And President Trump recognizes a situation like that, improperly handled by a governor, like it was by Governor Walz, if it gets out of control, is a bad situation for the citizens of any location. So in Los Angeles, we believe that ICE, which is a federal law enforcement agency, has the right to safely conduct operations in any state and any jurisdiction in the country, especially after 21 million illegals have crossed our border under the previous administration. ICE ought to be able to do its job, whether it's Minneapolis or Los Angeles.
I have limited time. I asked a budget
and they
question.
Are being,
Could the Secretary please address the budget? Thank you.
You asked about the situation in Los Angeles, and we believe ICE agents should be allowed to be safe in doing their operations, and we have deployed National Guard and the Marines to protect them in the execution of their duties, because we ought to be able to enforce immigration law in this country, unlike what Governor Walz did in 2020. There are 17,000 LAPD, you mentioned that. There would be 18,000 if not for the defund movement that folks like Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass have implemented.
You know, it is interesting that Tim Walz, and we have to remember this from the summer of George, let Minneapolis burn. He let it happen. And by the way, he talked about this contemporaneously. He said, listen, we got to just release some steam. We got to let this anger out. We got to start the healing. And the healing consisted of having people be harmed, be killed, businesses and homes be burned, loss of property, public and private, a police station burned to the ground. Let him get it out. Let him get it out, because what Tim Walz and other Democrats wanted at the time was for these feral animals to be let loose. They wanted the mayhem because it was a political opportunity for them. This could be a black eye for Trump. So when we come back, I think this will be an interesting conversation with Mike Brest to ask him about that and explain further why it's so important that Trump now act decisively. And what does decisive action look like? Because a lot of people are wondering. Got an Apple store getting looted, what's going on? I thought we had the Marines there. Well, not so fast. We got to explain how we can use these officers and what the Insurrection Act is all about. All right. Mike Brest up next, reporter for the Washington Examiner. Sam Mirejovsky here, News Talk 840 KXNT. Show brought to you by Sam and Ash Injury Law. In a crash, call Sam and Ash 702-820-1234 because you deserve what's right. Greetings, friends, and welcome to the What's Right show. Sam Mirejovsky here behind the What's Right microphone. I am Nevada's favorite recovering Californian, here Monday through Friday, 1 to 3 p.m. on News Talk 840 KXNT. Now, with me here is Mike Brest. Mike is a defense reporter for the Washington Examiner. He just broke out a beautiful piece, detailed report on the deployment, the Pentagon deployment of active duty Marines and National Guard troops to LA. Mike, welcome to the What's Right show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure, and thank you for making time for us. So, obviously, this is a hot topic. Everybody's talking about it, and let's first start here. What is the current state of things? How many National Guard troops do we have? Where are they deployed from? How many Marines do we have? Where are they coming from? And then what are they doing? What's the mission currently as of 2:00 on Tuesday?
All great questions and great places to start. So over the weekend, the president deployed 2,000 National Guard troops to LA to handle the riots. He has since deployed an additional 2,000, so that's 4,000, and about 1,700 of them are currently there. They have also, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has also deployed 700 Marines who are from 29 Palms. And so for the rules of engagement, this is one of the big questions, is about what are the Marines going to be doing there? And so at this point right now, all they're going to be doing is protecting law enforcement and federal buildings because they don't have, at this point, the authority to go out and make arrests of protesters, for example.
And what would be needed for that authority? Just not to jump in there, but to explain it.
Yeah. So the secretary can choose to go forward with a deployment of active duty troops to the U.S. However, it's not something that happens often. And so whenever it does happen, to get them to do more than just sort of support, it requires the president to invoke the Insurrection Act, which is something that very rarely happens, even though the president has talked about it dating back to his first term in office following the protests and the riots in the summer of 2020.
Okay. So it would so the Insurrection Act sort of still hanging out there, and Trump, I think he's being deliberately coy about it. That's a political conversation. I think he's saying, "Oh, it's out there, it's possible," and kind of having it be this threat. So until that happens, these troops are there to protect cops. Good, excellent. So and then I assume federal buildings, right? Because this is federal property, and we had the courthouse and the ICE detention facilities were all being attacked, over the weekend and overnight. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so their exact mission is to actually simply protect ICE enforcement and other police officers who are trying to maintain the peace and the calm. And so even though ICE may still be trying to carry out these deportation efforts and raids, and there may be protesters and police involved in trying to stop that, the military itself, the National Guardsmen, as well as the Marines, are not involved in the arrest of these protesters, and they won't be, barring, as I said, the invocation of the Insurrection Act.
Okay. Now, a big criticism and I know you can speak to this, but a big criticism of Trump by a lot of folks, shrill members of the mainstream media, is that he is doing this. He's deploying the California National Guard in direct opposition and over the objections of the governor, who is, charged by law of deciding when to deploy National Guard troops in his state. So Newsom saying don't deploy. In fact, he sent a big nasty gram letter the other day asking Trump and the administration to withdraw the troops. And Trump is doing it anyway. Under what authority is Trump doing it? Is this legal, right? Is the Supreme Court, is some federal court judge somewhere going to issue an injunction against this? And if it is, under what authority?
So all good questions. And so as you mentioned, broadly, the governor of any state is in charge of their National Guard. So they can choose to deploy them, whether it's for something like riot control or something like a response to a humanitarian disaster like an earthquake or a hurricane. And so it is very rare, as you mentioned, for the president to go around a governor and deploy the National Guard. And so this is something that hasn't been done since segregation, since the integration of schools in the 1960s, when President Johnson went around the sitting governor to force the integration of schools.
And Kennedy did it before that in 62 and 63.
Absolutely.
So
it's been a number of decades since it's happened, and we're about to find out the level of legality because Governor Newsom has filed a lawsuit, and so this will play out in the courts, as you mentioned. So this will be stress test right now in real time, and we'll see the amount of power the president has to usurp a governor regarding the deployment of the National Guard. That being said, the president does have the right to federalize the National Guard, which is well within his limits or her limits as president. However, so often is the case that it's done in conjunction with or with the approval of the governor.
Okay, which he doesn't have now is in writing.
Exactly.
He's got this big long letter. Okay, so that's going to still play itself out, but it's not without precedent. Number one, I mean, I grew up my whole childhood being taught about how wonderful it was that JFK and LBJ intervened, in Mississippi and in Alabama to enforce civil rights of Americans against the objection of terrible racist governors. And I, thought generally a good thing. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander, I suppose. We'll see how that plays out. These troops that are on the ground, be they National Guard or the Marines, what can they, okay, so they're protecting property. I got to put this in okay, so can they arrest people? Can they detain people? Can they, what if people begin using, attacking them with lethal force? Are they allowed to respond? Right? Can they fire on? They've got guns. I saw this big report in the media. Oh my gosh, they were carrying guns. Yeah, of course they're carrying guns. It's the freaking military. Of course they've got guns. That's the whole point here. So, but what do you know? What can you tell us about? Are there any restrictions put on them?
So it's hard to identify exactly the mission set, but I can tell you what we heard from the Commandant of the Marines, who was on Capitol Hill today to talk about this. And what he said is they are primarily there for arrests. They will be carrying batons as well as shields that will be primarily used for defense against whether it's in support of the federal buildings or federal officers. And so this really is a much more, I would say, defensive posture that they will be taking as opposed to an offensive one. That being said, military officials, by and large, believe that they have the right of self-defense. And so hopefully it doesn't come to that, and we will still wait to see how it plays out should it. But also it should be noted that both the National Guard's troops and the Marines are set to be there for 60 days. It's a 60-day deployment. And so hopefully things calm down within that time and we don't see anything of the sort.
Right. So just sort of a mere presence being enough to dissuade things getting worse.
Not only that, but just from a sheer numbers perspective, if, for example, ICE doesn't have to be worried about defending its facilities because the Marines are there, they can put more of a presence to carry out their mission.
That's actually a great point, right? They're not there. They're not having to deploy their own agents, tie up their agents in just preventing incursions or damage to their property, and they can focus on continuing the enforcement action.
Exactly. There's actually a strong parallel here between this and what's happening at the southern border, where U.S. troops are there to support DHS, Homeland Security, CBP, and so they are there to largely do administrative roles. Actually, again, because they're not allowed to carry out law enforcement functions domestically, and so they do administrative work to free up border personnel to carry out their mission.
Got it. Okay. So, so now, when I'm going to bring this home because I think this is an important point. People are saying, "Oh my gosh," even people like me who are obviously big fans of the president. I'm seeing the looters running into the Apple store, and stealing everything in sight. Walking out with the Nike sneakers from the Nike store. The National Guard and the Marines are not there to protect the Apple store, to be clear. That is not within their, that's not something they at this point are even authorized to do. So their mission is very specific. So this is not the Marines or the National Guard being ineffective in some way or not being used to their full potential, because right now they're strictly for this very narrow purpose of protecting law enforcement and federal property.
That's exactly right. And so, as I said, it's really to allow their presence is to allow law enforcement to do their job to the best of their abilities without having to worry. And so, if they are able to effectively help protect federal buildings, then it would allow law enforcement to then go after people who are robbing and looting from the Apple store and the like.
Wonderful. Well, Mike, I appreciate the rundown on this. If people want to follow you, you have social media handles, Twitter, etc. Where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find my byline at the Washington Examiner, or follow me on Twitter, and my handle is at Mike Brest DC.
Wonderful. Well, Mike, I hope we can keep in touch, and if this situation changes, we'd love to have you back on to get into the particulars.
Sounds good to me.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining us. Friends, Sam Mirejovsky here, News Talk 840 KXNT. The What's Right show is brought to you by Sam & Ash Injury Law. Be back in a moment.
The Sam & Ash team, they wanted me to have the best care. They had my interests at heart. I have an enormous amount of gratitude. I cannot say enough thank you.
Sam Mirejovsky here, Nevada's favorite recovering Californian, behind the What's Right microphone. So, what's interesting to me also is hearing from these protesters in their own voice. What is it? What are they actually about? Yesterday, downtown LA, a reporter caught up with one of these protesters who basically said, "Hey, capitalism doesn't work. It's defunct." Listen to this little communist.
We don't agree with the term illegal. We're undocumented. We've been here for thousands of years before you guys showed up, screw up everything. We think we should organize together with the U.S. working class and fight together and create a better system. We're anti-capitalist. We think socialism does work, real socialism, not Venezuela, not Cuba, not any of that crap that they try to sell us as socialism. And we believe it would be a more humane system that will take care of most of all people's necessities.
Is there a country we can look to kind of model the socialism idea?
The only model would be Soviet Union the first 4 years. After that, it became a mess. Sadly, there was a bureaucrat leadership that grew out of that, but it has to do mainly with the attacks of the U.S. and all big powers against that system that was working. In the few years that it lasted, it showed the world that it could do much better than capitalism.
Those of you watching can see this very short man, this little Bolshevik midget, can I say red dwarf? In a sombrero of all things, telling us that the Soviet Union actually a model for things that worked for socialism the first 4 years of the Soviet Union, where probably this guy would have been one of the first to get executed by his fellow Bolsheviks. This is what we're dealing with. See, did you hear anywhere here a person mad at ICE? Because I thought we just heard a little while back from the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, who claimed that if it hadn't been for ICE, if it hadn't been for the immigration sweeps, none of this would have happened. But this guy is actually calling for a socialist revolution. He's out there in the streets. It's crazy. Now, by the way, yesterday in the program, I mentioned how these Mexican flags waving everywhere with the scenes of mayhem in the background were not a good look, not going to be persuasive to people who, to people to change their minds on the subject of illegal immigration. Nothing endears you more than watching foreigners waving foreign flags, burning your city, your community to the ground. So they must have been listening because the protesters apparently changed their tactics. Here, a cameraman, reporter, talking to a woman who is being observed handing out USA flags, red, white, and blue flags, yesterday on the streets of downtown LA.
Are you going to help those American flags? We got rid of all of them when they started coming. We were sitting ducks here, so we...
How many did you guys
Oh, wait.
I think we got 5 or 6 out.
If you ask the Subaru right there...
But they're not put together.
Oh, they're not put together.
They're not put together.
Oh, okay.
Okay. That was a good idea.
Right.
We're going to bring them back out.
We're going to bring them back out after.
Yeah. We might be back out in an hour.
Yeah.
They're marching from this. They're going to start coming this.
Yeah.
I think that was a good idea after yesterday.
Yes.
But anyway, thank you guys.
Yeah,
Right on.
thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Where'd you get the American flag? Wait, where?
These I didn't see these. I was top.
It's like a random guy? Oh, all right. Thanks.
This is when? I was looking for these flags. Where did you get this?
Okay. Oh, are they just giving them out?
Yeah.
Yeah, the NGOs showed up, NED or whoever, Churla, the group we reported on yesterday. They got $35 million from the state of California last year, double what they got the year before, or almost triple, what they got the year before. Interesting, probably in anticipation of fomenting these types of anti-Trump protests, riots. Just go, okay, well, we better fly some American flags. So they started passing out American flags. This is, look, all of this, my point is, all of this costs money, right? You and I, okay, I understand. We have a bias. Most of us here right now talking during the show, the What's Right show, 1 to 3, Monday through Friday, are like-minded to at least some extent. So, but hear me out. Even if we weren't, we're all logical people. Things cost money. In the real world, free stuff doesn't just happen. There's no such thing as free. So flags. Have you decorated your house for 4th of July? And the little American flags, the small ones that you stick in the ground, cost money if you go to Ace or wherever to buy them. Am I right? So you think you just show up in a truck just magically, maybe the leftists think it's all unicorn farts and stuff like that, but it's not. So they clearly there's funding behind this. And it's significant. It's significant. I'm pointing this out. By the way, there's a great clip of this. Laura Powell, Daily Wire news program, Morning Wire today, talks about Chirla, CHIRLA. This is a group we mentioned yesterday, and all this shadowy money that is flowing into this mess.
What I uncovered was how connected they are to the Democrat establishment in California. Mayor Bass of Los Angeles is very connected to them. They've supported her. She's bragged about helping them get federal funding in the past. A whole slew, really. I mean, they endorsed Kamala Harris. Of course, Gavin Newsom, Adam Schiff has talked about them. They can't directly endorse candidates because they're a 501c3, but they have a 501c4 that they use for those candidate endorsements. They also sponsor a lot of legislation at the state level.
Now, you mentioned services they provide. One of those is related to trying to warn people about ICE operations and potentially protest them, correct?
Yeah, so there's a rapid response network that was set up that is a coalition of various nonprofits.
And we're going to play more of this when we come back. It's just a fascinating thing. I'm up against the break here. More on this when we return. Sam Mirejovsky, News Talk 840, KXNT. Rarely wrong, always right. Sam Mirejovsky here behind the What's Right microphone. Greetings, friends. Welcome to the program. Okay. Churla. This is the NGO group that received almost $36 million last year from the state of California and other governments. This almost nearly tripled the money that they received the year before, likely all to prepare it for various actions to oppose Trump in the Trump era. A Daily Wire's news program, Morning Wire, with civil liberties attorney Laura Powell. Powell gets asked about this. And the host, as I was playing this right before the break, you mentioned the services that Churla provides. One of them is related to trying to warn people about ICE operations. Listen to this.
State level.
Now, you mentioned services they provide. One of those is related to trying to warn people about ICE operations and potentially protest them, correct?
Yeah, so there's a rapid response network that was set up that is a coalition of various nonprofits, but they seem to be the central one because it's their phone number that's used as this hotline. And the hotline serves so that people on the street can call in to report when ICE is in the area, and then they can deploy people to go to that area. And in fact, Mayor Bass said in an interview that's how she found out about ICE enforcement actions in her city, that they are actually finding out from the work of this nonprofit and others what's going on in the streets. So that allows them to get the word out and people to congregate where those actions are taking place, and in some cases interfere with the officers' work.
Now, this is fascinating. Government money, and read tax dollars. If you live in California, for example, your tax money and any federal money, right, that goes to California from the federal government being dispersed by Sacramento to pay for an NGO, Churla, to, among other things, notify people of ICE enforcement, to quote unquote allow them to get the word out and to have people congregate, meaning flash mobs appearing in areas where ICE agents are working to interfere with the officers' work. You know all those videos that we constantly see of people on the video, oh, I can't believe you're doing this, or read them their rights, do this, do that, and yelling at officers as they are arresting illegal immigrants. Turns out that's not as spontaneous as you may think. This is, it's kind of like, Robbie, you're right, exactly. It's kind of like the thing that you learn working for NED. So it's exactly the same thing. It is deliberate interference in federal law enforcement. How Churla is paid for is explained further by Ms. Powell, and it's not particularly encouraging.
And then, of course, where is this money coming from is the question people ask next. I looked into financials. I found an audit that gave a lot more detail from 2023, and they had gotten around $34 million from the state. It had leaped from $12 million in 2022 to $34 million in 2023. So they're just swimming in money right now. There was also a federal grant from the Department of Homeland Security relatively small compared to this massive amount they're getting from the state. But that was $450,000 they got from the Department of Homeland Security. And Mayor Bass bragged about helping them get that money. That funding actually was frozen in February. And then they filed a lawsuit against DHS. And 10 days later, they terminated the contract. And in late May, that lawsuit was dismissed.
This is crazy. So, again, by the way, Doge discovered that and other agreements like this that gave money. Can you imagine? The Biden Department of Homeland Security was paying a group that helped prevent ICE enforcement. The Department of Homeland Security was paying a private group, an NGO, to stop activities that fall under the purview of the Department of Homeland Security. This is wild. Not only was Biden, again, this exhibit, I don't know, this is exhibit 1000 of, of instances where the Biden administration, instead of enforcing border security, instead of enforcing immigration law, were directly aiding and abetting the criminals who exploited the open door policy that the Biden administration put forward. This is what makes Biden's claim that if only the Republicans passed a bill, it's only a question of money. That's all the border needs is money. So ludicrous. They had the money. They were spending the money on aiding illegals, the transportation of them throughout the state, throughout the country, to various states, giving them all sorts of federal benefits. And in this case, literally paying for an organization to tip off and obstruct agents' abilities to operate and to apprehend aliens and criminal aliens. Wow. Just let that sink in. 34 million. I keep getting this wrong. So it's 34 million. It's not 36. It's not 35. $34 million from the state of California in 23. That rose from 12 million in 22. $34 million in 2023, the year before the election. I'm telling you, this is at the same time, at the exact precise same time, Joe Biden, in an effort to save his hide, was making himself out to be some sort of, border protector. And Kamala Harris, who ended up becoming the Democratic nominee, touted her credentials as the quote-unquote border czar. Absolute madness. Today, Maxine Waters, speaking of madness, says there was no evidence of any violence. No evidence. Now, Maxine Waters showed up at the federal detention facility the other day holding the SEIU guy who's since been released, pounding on the door, had the door slammed shut in her face. That was a funny moment. So here's Maxine Waters today talking about the fact that there was no violence, none violence.
And even those who were out of step with what we are advocating, peaceful protest, did not create any violence. Nobody was shot, nobody was killed. Get it in your head. And so when martial law is called, what are you going to say? I missed the point. Don't miss the point, you all. Don't think that somehow, because they called out the National Guard, there was violence. There was no violence. I was on the street. I know.
She was on the street. I know. I was on the street. I mean, she looks like she was on the street. No question about that. Bagdad Bob. Again, reality denialism by the people who have orchestrated this from the beginning, have funded it, and now will do everything in their power to prevent Trump from stopping it. That's what this is all about from top to bottom. Numerous internet sleuths are reporting on a clear image of a man who was seen handing out tens of thousands of dollars worth of gas masks to rioters beginning yesterday. He's believed to be a member of the Local 399, part of the Teamsters for a Democratic Union based in Southern California. It's exactly right. Meanwhile, Christy Walton, one of the Walmart heiresses, okay, is behind the No Kings June 14th mobilization. Full ads in the paper. We are the people of the United States of America. The honor, the dignity, integrity of our country are not for sale. We honor our commitments. We support a healthy national and international economy. What is this really about? All this sounds nice. It says below, paid for Christy Walton. This isn't some sort of conspiracy theory. This is an anti-Trump group, and it's part of a fight against ICE enforcement, and it's a part of, again, a deliberate effort to destabilize law-abiding society. Corey DeAngelis, a school choice evangelist, is how he describes himself, says the left is planning to rise up across the country on June 14th, a national day of defiance. Randy Weingarten is supporting it. Join AFT President Randy Weingarten for a special town hall on June 10th at 6 p.m. Eastern, which is in about 15 minutes, to prepare for No King's Day on June 14th. You know what's funny? This gets out of hand. If this further deteriorates, and we spoke to Mike Brest about this, and the Marines and the National Guard troops, 4,000 National Guard troops, 1,700 of them already deployed, 700 Marines from 29 Palms, and perhaps also from Camp Pendleton on the scene in L.A., ready to go. If this further deteriorates, I actually, if I have to pick and choose between letting L.A. burn and having Trump act as a king and send in the cavalry, I'm going to go with the king, all right? Just telling you that between you and me. Sam Mirejovsky, News Talk 840 KXNT. Back in a moment. One of the things that I'm trying to measure in all this as I look at the things unfolding over in LA, the riots, is what minds is it changing? And who is it helping actually politically? Sam Mirejovsky, News Talk 840 KXNT. Obviously the Democrats intend to obstruct ICE proceedings and further deteriorate polite society in an effort to maintain political power. However, optically, and I think that clip that I played showing the protesters now, picking up American flags instead of Mexican flags being dropped off by the busload, by the truck full during these protests, shows that optically this is very bad for leftists. It's bad for the Democratic Party. It's bad for open border advocates. I'm having a little bit of a trouble here loading a particular clip that I wanted because on Sunday, there's quite a kerfuffle around Rand Paul suggesting that the proposed border wall budget is far too high. And he went on Fox News with Maria Bartiromo, and Bartiromo basically said, you're saying that the money being spent on the border wall is too excessive. And Senator Rand Paul said, yeah, they want $46.5 billion. I did the math on this, blah, blah, blah. And he goes through the whole breakdown. And no, we don't have the clip. Okay. Regardless, $6.5 million per mile. He's like, oh, this is crazy. And listen, I want to tell you here, where I am on the border is this. If we don't have a border, if we don't fix illegal immigration, we don't have a country. The national debt is, to me, a second issue. And the border is actually ahead of the national debt in terms of a preservation of the republic. We can always deal with the money. So we can always deal with it. That's a solvable problem compared to losing all of our national sovereignty. And the libertarians here have actually been sort of a laissez-faire about this. And there's a great example of this. Libertarian influencer Warren Redlick saying that the Democrats actually changed his mind on the subject of open borders. This was fascinating.
As a libertarian, I've been a longtime believer in open borders. And I'd like at this point to thank Governor Newsom, Elizabeth Warren, and the Democratic Party in general for persuading me that I was wrong and that open borders are actually a bad idea. It hadn't occurred to me that if you had, I understood there was risks that some people would come in that you wouldn't want to come into your country. I hadn't anticipated that there would be an organized effort by bad people to bring bad people into our country, to commit crimes, to do all kinds of bad things. If I had realized that, I didn't realize the extent of the depravity of the radical left and whoever the hell these idiots are, that somebody would consciously try to invade the country in the way that they have. And I think that the events that we're seeing in Los Angeles, I was starting to come around to this a little bit, but the events we're seeing in Los Angeles right now, it could never be more clear. You have people waving foreign flags attacking America. They're attacking American government officials. They're attacking Waymo cars. They're starting fires. I think they've persuaded me that I no longer support open borders, and I'd like to thank the Democrats for showing me that, number one, it does make sense to have real borders, and number two, I will never vote for any Democrat ever again. You have persuaded me that you cannot be trusted to run anything.
Yeah. I mean, this is obviously a logical person who's able to change his mind based on new evidence. Now, the immigrant vote, incidentally, it almost backs up what this guy is saying. The immigrant vote is rapidly moving to the right on this issue as well. And you had Harry Enton talking to Kate Bolduan on CNN today, going through those numbers.
Immigrant citizens, immigrant voters, foreign-born voters have gone tremendously to the right on this issue in 2024 and 2025 versus where they were in 2020. Closest to or trust more in immigration. You go back to 2020. Democrats, get this, held a 32-point lead on this issue. Immigrant voters were in the Democratic camp. Jump forward to 2024, 2025. Look at that shift, a 40-point shift to the right among immigrant voters. Republicans now lead on this issue by 8 points over Democrats, more so than any other group that I could find. The group of voters who became more hawkish on immigration were, in fact, immigrants themselves, immigrants who are registered to vote in this country.
It's astounding. And I'm not surprised. The immigrants I know in my life, lawful immigrants, are incensed over what they're seeing. So these immigrant voters on Donald Trump, by the way, has also shifted since his original 2016 run. This is another part of this that's interesting. Again, this is Harry Enton on CNN talking through this issue with Kate Bolduan.
How about how they feel about kind of traditionally, historically about Donald Trump?
Yeah, so, you see this shift and you go, what is going on underneath the hood? Well, take a look, Donald Trump. You remember when he first ran back in 2016, immigrant voters were one of his weakest spots. But look at this, Trump's vote share in presidential election among, again, immigrant citizens, those who are registered to vote. Look at this. In 2016, he got 36% of the vote. You go to 2020, 39% of the vote. Look at this, in 2024, all the way up to 47% of the vote. Some polls I looked at had him barely losing that vote. Some polls I looked at had him barely winning that vote. Again, there is no block of voters that shifted more to the right from 2020 to 2024 than immigrant voters, and Donald Trump, at least in some surveys, actually won that vote. On average, it's about equal. So there may be all this stuff, right, about undocumented immigrants and Trump being harsh on them, but immigrant voters themselves have increasingly liked Donald Trump and have increasingly moved to the right on immigration and into the Republican camp.
And the reason for this is, folks, as I have repeatedly told you, nothing pisses off legal immigrants like illegal immigration. And now that all of this stuff has come out about just how much money the Biden administration gave to illegal immigrants to come and rape this country, It's infuriating to the legal immigrants who didn't get the handout, who had to do the paperwork, had to wait in line, had to, jump through all the hoops. And I think these people are now eternal converts to the holy church of Trump.
And this is where it all kind of comes together, Kate Baldwin. Look at this. The net favorable rating, immigrants who are here illegally, among immigrant citizens, again, those registered to vote. In 2020, look at this, plus 23 points on the net favorable rating. But look at where we were in 2024, minus 6 points, underwater. So immigrant citizens have become increasingly unfavorable in their views of those immigrants who are here illegally. So I think it's so important when we're talking about this debate from a political angle to separate those out who are undocumented immigrants versus those who are here legally and those who are citizens and those who are voters, because that group of voters has felt increasingly distant from those immigrants who are here legally. And so again, when we're talking about this, at least from a political angle, this is why Donald Trump feels so comfortable, because in fact, amongst the group that you would think that would be most opposed to this, in fact, they become increasingly favorable, not just towards Donald Trump, but towards a Republican point of view on immigration and becoming distant from those immigrants who are here illegally.
Yeah, this is exactly right. And these are CNN polls. These are CNN polls. Just imagine what the reality is out there. I'll tell you, anybody who thinks that Trump did damage to the Republican Party, and there are Republicans that actually think that, need to have their head examined. They are on par with Bagdad Bob and the crazy Democrats who say there's nothing to see here in LA. Nothing to see. All right, I'll see you folks tomorrow. Be safe out there. We've got this. Sam Mirejovsky over and out.